I'm Carla.
And I'm Keyes.
And we're the History Twins.
Welcome to our podcast, where history is more than just dates and dead people.
Join us each episode as we explore the past through music and story. So, This is episode 4. We've made it to episode 4.
Right.
And we have been sort of documenting the story and the music behind our musical, This Man's a Spy, which is the revolutionary tale of intrigue between American General
Benedict
Arnold. I know, I'll get it eventually. And British Major John Andre. Yes. So in today's episode, or this episode, we're going to focus on our song, The Revolution So Far / West Point. It's kind of a medley. It's like 2 songs in one. And this song is important. Well, they're all important. But this song is important because it provides context for everything that is going on at this time.
It places our story in the timeline of the revolution.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I remember when you first wrote, when you first were coming up with the lyrics, and I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of words. There's just there's so much. But the thing is, it easily kind of catches us up to where we are and gives context to how we as a country got to the place that we were in. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I had learned that in the 1760s, that far back, Britain was deep in debt. And I think it has something to do with the French Indian War. So they were in debt. They had all of this money. They had doubled their debt.
Well, they didn't have money. That's the point.
Oh, well, right. Well, now they had even less. They had more debt now.
They doubled their debt.
Doubled their debt. So the British Parliament imposed a series of taxes on the American colonists to help pay those debts. So how you like that? You're like, I wasn't even there. Y'all need the money. So now all of a sudden you're going to tax us? What? Well, that is what they did. Mm-hmm. So first there was the Stamp Act in 1765, and that taxed colonists on virtually every piece of printed paper that they used.
Wow.
Every piece of printed paper.
Wow.
From playing cards or business licenses and newspapers and legal documents, just on paper. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, think about how much paper we use, just now.
Right.
The idea of being taxed like that.
How much paper we use in the digital age.
Oh, yeah,
so
even.
Back then, of course, all they had was paper.
Exactly. And then there was the Townshend Act in 1767.
And what was that? That
taxed essentials such as paint, paper, glass, lead, and tea.
Wow.
Now, the tea... Oh, not to mention while all this was going on, King George III mandated that colonists had to house British soldiers, like in their homes.
Oh.
So that means, because they didn't have a place for them to live. Mm-hmm. So British soldiers could oh, hey, your house looks nice. Let me come and stay there. So no matter.
No choice.
Exactly. You couldn't do anything about it. They could just come and stay at your house and eat your food. And it's not like people were necessarily, rich or anything, but all of a sudden, and I'm sure these soldiers eat a lot, Sure they have the power of an anaconda, dilating powers of an anaconda. That's a little Legend of Sleepy Hollow joke. And they're probably eating them out of house and home and probably leering at the wives. I'm sure all of that. I know, of course. So that's not fair. No. And they couldn't do anything about it. So here it is. These American colonists had to put up with so much. Everything is being taxed. People could come in and out of your house at any time or night, and they could just find a place to live and sleep and eat your food, and that was all good. But the Americans were like, whoa, wait a second. So in 1773 was the infamous Boston Tea Party. Mm-hmm. Remember that?
Sure.
That was a political protest that occurred on December 16th, 1773 in Boston, Massachusetts. And the colonists had been frustrated and angry at Britain for imposing taxation without representation.
Of course, they weren't at the table when the decision was made.
Exactly. They weren't at the table. They weren't in the room where it happened.
No.
Exactly. So they're like, wait a second, we're not even there to defend ourselves. We're not even in the room to say no, but
these are just unilateral decisions.
Yeah. What's that? You know, that's not fair. So, because of this moment, the colonists dumped 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company into the harbor.
Wow.
Massive. So the Boston Tea Party was considered the first major act of defiance. And, defiance to British rule.
Right.
That was like their first and everybody heard about it. Word spread, and it rallied all of the other colonists and patriots among all the other 13 colonies. People were like, "Oh, did you hear what happened in Boston? Oh, yeah, that's right." La, la, la. So it kind of got people excited. People like, "Wait a second, we can resist. We don't have to take this lying down, shall we say."
We're not gonna
take it. Oh, we're not. Yeah, exactly. All of that. So the next thing that happened was that the colonists were fed up, as we said, and then this led to the shots being fired between the British and the colonists in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts in 1775.
Right.
And
shot heard round the world.
The shots heard round the world. And depending on where you're looking up this information, they're not really sure who started it. But the thing is, well, this was the start of the American Revolution.
Right.
Because the colonists were not trained as military people. So the whole thing is these shots were fired, but then the colonists kept fighting back. So as our song mentions, no one had seen such a thing before. Tradesmen and farmers starting a war. Now, I believe in our first episode, we're talking about officers and being gentlemen, and there was...
That was the second episode, Officer, Gentleman, Spy.
Oh, got it. Yes. And there were, appropriate ways or appropriate protocol of how fights, of how war, battles...
Rules of war.
Exactly. When you have tradesmen and farmers getting involved with nothing to lose...
No rules.
They're not following those rules. They don't know the rules. So, of course, they're breaking them.
Well, and they're not stupid.
Well, exactly. Here they are in their turf, and they're going to fight with everything that they have, and they're not going to fight what I guess
in the same method.
Exactly. So
during the American Revolution and wars up to this, each army would be in long parallel lines, and they'd meet each other this way. Whereas the British were still doing that, but the Americans were often hiding behind rocks and trees, and and so sort of a guerrilla warfare kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. So this was so that was something new that the British had not encountered before. Right. They were like, "Hey, wait a second! They're not fighting the way they're supposed to fight." But the colonists were like, "We don't know anything about that. We didn't go to military school. You're in our turf. Here is a tree, and I'm gonna hide behind it and throw some rocks at you, or shoot at you." Well, whatever they had, I think I would imagine though there was probably all kinds of. I'm sure like kids and stuff were like, "Ma, here you go." Anyway, it wasn't what the British would, I imagine, would call fair, a fair fight. So, as I said, no one had seen such a thing before. Tradesmen and farmers starting a war. The people had reached their limit, with King George's and the tyranny, and they refused to take it anymore. We're not gonna take it. Yeah, I know we're singing already, but still. So all of this is going on. Remember, so we said like in the 1760s, there are all these rules and taxes coming through. 1773, there was the Tea Party. 1775 was the shots heard around the world in Lexington and Concord. In 1776, this is when the Continental Congress gets together, and this is when they finally draft that Declaration of Independence from Britain. So this is when they finally drew that line in the sand, and they're like, you know what? We declare our independence from England, and
we're breaking
take
up
that.
with you.
Yeah, we're breaking up with you. Yes, exactly. And so after 76, there was the Battle of Saratoga in 77.
Right.
And we had said before 1777, in the same battle, this is where General Arnold,
Right.
Benedict Arnold, had fought and was injured.
But it was also his great victory.
Yes, it was his great victory. And because of this victory, that is when the French said, we will come and join your cause, and we will be your allies.
And to be clear, Arnold wasn't injured. He was wounded.
Oh, he was wounded. What's the difference?
The difference is an injury is as a result of accident. A wound is, war, gunshot.
Oh, I never thought
stabbing.
of that.
Yeah.
Oh, so he was wounded.
He was wounded.
Yeah.
Got shot in the leg. The same leg he'd been shot in the previous battle.
That's right. So he was
in tough shape.
Yeah, so he was wounded. That's a very good distinction. I'm so glad you said that. See, I wouldn't have known. See, you learn something new every day.
You stick with me, you learn 2 new things every day.
I love it. So, Battle of Saratoga happened. Benedict Arnold was named a war hero. And
well, not so much actually. He did not get credit for that.
No, he didn't.
He was a war hero from previous battles, but this big important battle, he did not get the credit for.
That's true. So the French came in and they're like, "Oh yeah, we did a good job."
No, the French weren't in it yet.
Well, no. I'm saying like whoever, I don't know, maybe Washington or whoever the people in charge were, whoever the powers that be were, they're like, "Yay, the French are here. We have allies." But no one ever said, "Well, General Benedict Arnold, he helped get us this."
Right.
So he got no credit whatsoever.
It's true.
And he was not happy about that.
He was not, and he was seriously wounded.
He was wounded, and so was his pride.
Well, that too, yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. So now the French is involved, and the war drags on. Like just because the French show up, it's not immediately over.
Right.
So we have 78 and 79, and the war is dragging on, and it's a slog. We say war is hell, but it really is. Remember, and they have been resisting the British since at least the 1760s. So up until this time, we've had like these kind of ragtag militia people, Minutemen, et cetera, and there are also women in the militia, by the way. But aside from that, there are all these people just trying to live their life, just trying to maintain, and this war is just slogging on. So, as we mentioned in our episode, 1780 is when George Washington gave Benedict Arnold the command over West Point. Exactly. Now, Washington had no idea that Benedict Arnold at that point had already reached out to British General Clinton. I believe his name is Henry Clinton, by the way. And Benedict Arnold had already arranged, he'd already said to General Clinton, "I'm going to take this, I'm going to get this spot. And when that happens, I'm going to help you all capture it. I'm going to give you the plans," or, they were in cahoots, as my mother would say. But Washington had no idea.
Right.
So remember we said that Benedict Arnold had been wounded. And while he was in Philadelphia, he was recovering from those wounds. And when he was ready to go, when his wounds had recovered, when he had healed from those wounds, instead of going back to battle, he lobbied for West Point. He lobbied George Washington, and he's like, "Hey, you know what? You need to put me in charge at this spot. I need to be here, and I think that's, I think I need to take a little break. I've just got married to my beautiful wife. I'm just gonna, I think this is the best place for me to be." It's
true, and it's a funny thing that he was to be the first general of it. And each fort is named after its first general. So West Point was not actually called West Point at that point. It was Fort Arnold. Fort Arnold.
They named that fort after him. And he still gave it up. I mean, you would have thought maybe just for a half minute, he might have like a little twinge of guilt. Like, this is now Fort Arnold. And then he'd be like, "Well."
And then the fort was taken over by the American General Clinton.
Yes, exactly. James Clinton. Yes. See, that's why I wanted to make sure I had all the names. Yes. So here we have Benedict Arnold, head of, Fort Arnold at that time. And the war has been going on. It's been a slog. It's 1780. He's already reached out to British General Clinton. That's
right.
The Henry Clinton. And he's like making plans. And he's tired.
Yeah.
And
discouraged,
exactly. Oh, but you know what? Let's also talk about for a second. I want to hear the song, but before we play that, will you tell people why that was such a strategic location again?
Sure. Well, it guarded the Hudson River, which is a major artery up into the northern colonies. And the river is very wide, sometimes miles wide in certain places, and the current is very strong. But in West Point, the river narrows, and the West Point is high up, so you can see who's coming and you can fire down on them. They even made a iron chain they stretched across it during the time of year when the river didn't freeze, so that they had control over what ships could pass and which ships couldn't. Wow. 65 tons of iron chain.
65-ton chain stretched across this part of the Hudson River.
Yeah. And
no one could get through if they weren't...
If they didn't lower the chain.
Right, if they didn't lower the chain.
Yeah. So, and we've seen some of the links. They're about 3 feet, but they're huge iron links.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a really strategic place.
Yeah.
So Benedict Arnold knew what he was doing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
If the British took command, that would have taken out the whole war. It would have ended the war in their favor.
Exactly. So let's hear this song, The Revolution So Far / West Point.
All right.
Ever since April 75, the American patriots were trying to drive the British from their chokehold on the colonies. Wanting independence, wanting to be free. Now maybe you know, maybe you've heard the tyranny of King George III, taxing everything from sugar to tea, quartering their soldiers anywhere they please. In Lexington and Concord, events unfurled, starting with the shot heard round the world. No one ever saw such a thing before. Tradesmen and farmers starting a war. The next thing you know, it was 76. The British and Americans getting their licks. Up in Philadelphia, a congregation got together and drafted a declaration. Then something big happened in 77. Victory at Saratoga brought the French in. Meanwhile, Britain still held New York City, trying to catch Washington and his committee. In 78 and 79, the war dragged on, but they held the line. Which brings us now to 1780, where our story begins, gentlemen and ladies.
At West Point.
West Point? I thought it was Fort Arnold.
Well, that's what they called it before this whole thing started. But once Arnold left and took the plans with him, they gave the command to General Clinton. That's about the time that the name was changed, and you won't hear it called Fort Arnold again.
But what's the big deal about West Point? I mean, it's just another fort, right?
I'm glad you asked. Check it out. The Hudson River, long and majestic, it's also what made it most strategic. It runs up and down. The state of New York brought troops and supplies to the colonies north. The current is strong and the river is wide, sometimes miles from side to side. The middle of the river is the perfect spot to hide from cannon fire and musket shot. But up at West Point, the river narrows and the point's up high, so you can fire down on any ship unfortunate to be caught there when the tide is slack and the wind is nowhere. If that's not enough to give you pause, they stretch a 65-ton iron chain across it. If the British took command of West Point, there would never be any way to hold the colonies together. So now do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see why West Point has got such clout? Now that you know, I don't have to tell you that Arnold knew he had something of incredible value. And we're back.
That
was fun?
Yeah, it was fun. So before we were saying that Benedict Arnold had grown tired of the revolution, of the American Revolution that was going on in the war, and he had already reached out to the British to give up Fort Arnold, that was later known as West Point.
Right.
And, you know, Benedict Arnold had felt like his past efforts, such as the money that he spent when he paid his own people, or the injuries and wounds that he had received,
absolutely,
kind of felt like that was for nothing.
Right.
So he decided that the best way for him to kind of take advantage of the situation was to give up the plans for Fort Arnold, aka West Point, in exchange for £20,000 and a command position in the British military.
Okay.
Yeah. So like that was his number. We're like, okay, what is your number? His number at that time was £20,000.
Right.
Like I have no idea how much that would be worth now, but supposedly, allegedly, reportedly, that was the amount. Now, as we said before, it was known as Fort Arnold at the time, and after he defected, it became known as Fort Clinton,
right,
after American General James Clinton, because he took it over after Arnold defected.
Right, and the last thing they wanted was to have Arnold's name on something.
Exactly, and we'll talk later when we when we're finished with this. You know, at the end of like some of these songs, they really did. They made sure that his name was not remembered anywhere.
Oh, it's remembered, all right.
Oh, it's remembered, but just not, not written. So now another interesting fact about 1794, about Fort Arnold / Clinton. In 1794, it was used for training cadets in engineering.
Oh.
Yeah, so the grads, the people who graduated from there, the military engineering grads, they had designed almost all of the early American railways, roads, and bridges. Because I know, right? It was the only engineering college in the country until 1824.
I had
no idea. Exactly right. Like that was like a really cool thing. But in 1802, that's when Fort Arnold, Fort Clinton officially became known as the United States Military Academy at West Point. And I was looking up, like, how did they get that name? Because, I mean, like, this is the East Coast. I'm like, what is that? So what had happened was West Point got its name because it was located, or it still is, on the high west bank of New York's Hudson River. So I thought that was interesting. So let's see. So we mentioned that there was a 65-ton iron chain that was stretched across it. And so Fort Arnold, West Point, Fort Clinton, whatever you want to call it, it was basically the gateway to New York. So
and the northern colonies.
And the northern colonies. So the idea is that this song that we did it kind of captures everything. So that's one thing I do like, or really kind of love about, and it's spoken word. It's spoken word over a lot of groove, and there's, as I said, it's a lot of words because I'm always like try to remember everything, but it's just important to know. Well, the thing I love about this song is it covers a lot of ground. So everything that we cover in this song, like all of this history, we're talking about 75, 76, 78, 79. We're going kind of year by year. And we're saying, okay, so now we're in 1780, and this is where the treason happens between Benedict Arnold and Major John Andre. Like, this happens in 1780, and we talk about how we got there. Right. And so you don't have to sit through a whole entire history lesson or a history, like a whole semester, so you get all of this information within a few minutes. Yeah. And hopefully, it's kind of fun. So, if we'd love to hear your feedback. So please let us know what you think about this song or these songs, this medley. And, hopefully it's something that that you'll maybe remember always. I know that's giving us a lot of credit. Yeah. Well, still, that was our point. But the
facts might stick with you.
Yes, exactly, and we hope they do. Yeah. So now that you know, you know.